you manage process that emotionally from both parents?
Can't say I handled it perfectly. The stuff from my dad, I think it really put a deep fear of rejection in me. Because I didn't know how to approach. I didn't know. So I knew, I would say the way I handled that was I learned how to fit in really, really quick. I learned how to do or say what a person likes or what they don't like, or to find out. I'm going to do what I can to find out. And I'm going to adjust my temperature as quick as possible so that you don't say no to me, so you don't reject me, so you don't put me away, or so I don't feel uncomfortable. Because to feel uncomfortable is painful. So I learned to avoid pain instead of go into pain.
Mm.
Um, and with my mom, I say, all in all, ultimately, she never badmouthed my dad, which is, I really honor her for that. But I mean, she's a human. So obviously, at points of stress, you become the one that they lean on, you, or you hear things, so it colored the way I saw my dad, but also colored the way I saw men in general. And because of that disconnect, I already felt like every other dude had some X factor that I didn't. And somehow that men were bad or men were not safe. Like, I don't know if that's really the case. But if that's the case during the formative years, that begins to be something you believe. I hope that answers your question.
Again, I really appreciate, again, just you being willing to take, to do this with me. And just, again, really excited to get to know you a little bit. My background is in emotional intelligence. I say that, but I mean, the past 3 or 4 years, it's been my background. Not like I've got a lifetime with this, because I've been emotionally clueless most of my life. And
Mm.
just recently kind of got on this journey of emotional healing and emotional growth and stuff. And so now I do kind of corporate coaching in the EQ space, like emotion intelligent leadership. I've got a podcast called EQ Gangster. And then and then our membership is EQ Mafia. So because it's been, for me, my emotional growth journey God has totally changed my life through my emotional growth journey, emotional healing journey. And so now I love talking to other successful entrepreneurs and business owners, and just see kind of what your emotional journey has been like, you know what I mean, with throughout your life, and some of the highs, some of the lows, and kind of how you navigated some of those things. So you cool with all that kind of conversation?
Cool with it, man. Let's go. What you talking about, man?
Awesome, bro. You got your own podcast?
Oh, yeah, it's called Listen Then Speak. So
Wait, what's it called?
listen, then speak. So we'll talk about that, because that's part of my emotional intelligence journey and just some of the things, hard things that God's taken me through. So
Wow. Okay.
I'm an empath as well. So after, like, I'm taking in everything they say, I'm thinking through it. I'm also type 1, 2 Enneagram. So my mind is just going like this while somebody's talking. So I take notes to keep myself on task and to make sure that what they said is informing the next path we go down. So I get it.
Right. Okay. Love it. Okay.
Be
So,
calm, man. You cool with me? It's fine.
Awesome, man, Big Jahmaal, man, I'm so excited, bro. Okay. So tell me your story. And if you don't mind, if and again, if you feel comfortable, if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine too. But if you wouldn't mind starting literally in your childhood and kind of show us the arc of your life, and kind of including there some of that emotional journey as well, to how did you end up from, again, like from birth to boom, this successful entrepreneur, podcaster, business owner that you are today?
Hey everybody, I'm Jahmaal Marshall. So I'm going to take you through just a little bit of my journey. So I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California in 1984. So yes, I'm dating myself from the old school. Thankfully, I still look pretty young, I think. Was raised in a two-parent home. I'm the youngest of three, but I'm the youngest of two from my father's second marriage. growing up in the early days from 84 to 89, I don't remember much of California because I was only 5 when we moved away. Uh, and we even lived in part of Inglewood. I just remember it being just cool. I loved I loved being there. I loved being a kid. Uh, I did notice that with my dad, I did not know anything about alcohol or drugs, but that was his vice. Um, and so we came to DC in 89 because his job with construction, the union moved out here all the way to the East Coast. And my parents are originally from here in Washington, DC. And so little by little, I would say by the time I was 8 years old, I noticed a disconnect between the two of us. And more, he ran the streets. You know, my mom, by that time, she was a Christian woman. And so I was raised in the house, was very confused. It's like I was hearing two different messages. And he wasn't always around. It's not like he was always running the streets because he provided. You know, there's never a time I didn't know where he was. But when I didn't, coming home, he would be in a very different position if he was either drunk or high. So that colored the way I saw a dad. And then the value that a dad puts in his son, like, you know, my father, he grew up on the streets himself. He taught himself how to read, taught himself how to write. His dad was not in his life. His father, my grandfather, was actually a very successful entrepreneur. And he found out that my grandfather was his dad because my grandmother told him he would go to this bread shop. And she said, "That is your father." That's how he found out who my grandfather was. And he actually told my father in a heated moment of anger between them when my dad was a teenager that he paid my grandmother to abort him. And so he had a whole nother family that he was raising in another neighborhood, and he left them nothing. And so that's a one side of who I am. And my mom was, I always remember her. I mean, she actually had a childhood and a teenage and a young adulthood, not being a Christian, living her own life. I always remember her being a Christian because that's what she always was. So she was absolutely divine. And sometimes I felt like dad was mean enough to be Satan himself. And that colored a lot of things. Like one thing I say about my dad was he was super authentic, you know, and especially like when he was drunk, he would really spill his heart and spill his guts. That's how I found out all these things about him. And then because we couldn't afford like a boxing, like one of those punching bags, we would actually tie up a bunch of like newspapers and a bunch of other materials and put them in a bag and tie it to the ceiling. And he would teach me like, because he grew up fighting, like, you know, how to fight and different stuff, different things like that. But I found it hard to relate to him when he was that way. And so a lot of times it was just myself, my mom, and my sister, unless I was around my family and my cousins and stuff like that. So part of that EQ started out with a lot of fear and a lot of insecurity. But also, I guess the plus of having an older sister, because I was a bad little boy. I learned how to treat women in a way that was respectful. I learned very quickly what they like and what they don't like. And I learned that we speak two very different languages. So I fast forward because I mean, if we start from there to now, that's just will take a really, really long time. Fast forward, I would say 20 something years. And I remember my dad, he was really, really drunk. This was like 2005, 2006. And that's when he told me everything I share with you. And I remember us sitting on the floor in the hallway in an apartment. And I remember saying, "Hey, would you just go to church with us tomorrow?" And it's not like I was living my life perfectly. It's not like church, whatever is the answer, because it's like you really have to do the work and you really have to walk with God. And you have to, it's not easy. But that's the only thing I could think of after hearing him just spill all that. And that's a lot for a 20-year-old to absorb. I mean, just tons that I can't even get into right now. And I remember that night, man, us just being on the floor praying together and crying together. And the next day he went to service. and he had talked with my pastor, and he had given his life to Christ. And I mean, I never thought all my years that that would happen because, growing up, I didn't hear the words "I love you" a lot from him, and so I, you know, I look to other people for that like type of affirmation. I always heard "I love you" and "I'm proud of you" from my mom, but it's nothing like hearing it from your dad. And I remember I was stuck on a bus headed to Tennessee in a tornado, and he had called on my cell phone, and before I hung the phone up, he said, "I love you." I was like floored. Like I was like looking at my phone, like, what? Because I had never heard those words before.
How old were you at that time
At that
when he
time,
said
I
that?
was at least, I think I was 21. I was 21. Yeah. So you think about like all the years that your brain is being shaped and formed, and to not hear that, and to have so many insecurities about how do you approach your dad? How do you converse with him? How do you talk with him? Um, and so that was a moment right there. And of course, I was expecting perfection after he became a Christian. That was not the case. It was baby steps. I mean, this man was somebody who ran like the streets. And so he was just learning it and doing the best he knew how with what he knew. But what I loved about it was like with him, what you saw was what you got. He didn't know like none of the Christianese, none of the religious stuff. And so what he had was real. Um, and that I began to see like our family address things that we never talked about before. And also me addressing things like with my mom, because when you're in a position like that, of course, you there was times where I was the man of the family. And so kind of becoming a surrogate spouse and be kind of her, depending on me to be there, even if she didn't want to put that on me, it kind of happened invariably. So I just that was a lot of things that formed the early years to my
So
teenage to my
Jahmaal,
young adult years.
let me. This is man. That's and I totally appreciate your vulnerability and your transparency. I just think there's so many there's so much that you shared. How emotionally, right? So there's so many things, man. Just from an emotional standpoint, how did you emotionally handle, if you did? For me, I was a stuffer and avoider my whole life. I avoided and stuffed my emotions for 3 or 4 decades. And so how did you emotionally process, cope, deal with, manage the emotions from your dad, that whole dynamic, right? Through from 0 to 20, 21 years old. But then also, just like you brought up that dynamic, how did you handle the conscious or unconscious pressure of having to be the man of the house as a kid for and in some cases maybe surrogate spouse, hearing your mom maybe, hey son, man, I want to let me open up and kind of vent or share some of the things I'm struggling with. And as a kid, wow, that's no joke. How did you manage process that emotionally from both parents?
I can't say I handled it perfectly. The stuff from my dad, I think it really put a deep fear of rejection in me. Because I didn't know how to approach. I didn't know. So I knew, I would say the way I handled that was I learned how to fit in really, really quick. I learned how to do or say what a person likes or what they don't like, or to find out. I'm going to do what I can to find out. And I'm going to adjust my temperature as quick as possible so that you don't say no to me, so you don't reject me, so you don't put me away, or so I don't feel uncomfortable. Because to feel uncomfortable is painful. So I learned to avoid pain instead of go into pain.
Mm.
Um, and with my mom, I say, all in all, ultimately, she never badmouthed my dad, which is, I really honor her for that. But I mean, she's a human. So obviously, at points of stress, you become the one that they lean on, you, or you hear things, so it colored the way I saw my dad, but also colored the way I saw men in general. And because of that disconnect, I already felt like every other dude had some X factor that I didn't. And somehow that men were bad or men were not safe. Like, I don't know if that's really the case. But if that's the case during the formative years, that begins to be something you believe. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. And at what point, like you're saying some really insightful, emotionally insightful points here. At what point in your life did you start becoming emotionally aware of, oh, hey man, this is what's going on inside me? You know what I mean? Like that's incredible. I didn't ever develop that until again a few years ago when I started my whole emotional growth journey. It sounds like you may have made some of those connections even in your childhood.
I would say probably by the time I was 16, definitely 18. Um, you know, I pretty much became very self-aware. And it was weird when I was going off to college. I went in initially for computer graphics. So that's a part of me answering your first question. And I absolutely hated the schedule. You know, they had classes that were 2 or 3 hours apart. And at this time, I didn't have a car. So I was riding all the way out to my college. And I was like, I'm not staying on this campus that long. So I changed my whole schedule to general studies. And then I started taking some psych courses because when I would talk to people, it was weird. After I turned about 17 or 18, most of my friends were 10 to 20 to some even 30 years older than me, which was really weird that older people were drawn to me. I don't understand why. And they would share things with me that I wouldn't ask for. You know, I always had a motto: if someone doesn't offer, I don't ask. But if you do offer, I'm going to listen and be a safe place. And so I would hear a running theme of just a bunch of people around me like, you ever thought about being a counselor? That wasn't even on the cards for me. I wasn't thinking about that. It's two things I wanted to be. I wanted to be a graphic artist and I wanted to be a prosecuting attorney. So, and it was just strange. And so I changed my major to psych and general studies. And when I was at junior college, and then I went off to Region University to complete my undergrad. And so I became very aware during those years, and even through some mini counseling through a pastor at that time, just about how I was designed, who I am, some of the things I've been through. And then in 2006, I started doing some of the hard things of wanting to take that journey myself, and wanting to take some responsibility for my own actions and my own avoidance.
How did you become aware, self-aware, or start becoming self-aware from that? You said 16 to 18. You said maybe started at 16 but really became self-aware kind of at 18. What happened?
I was weird. I for a while had, I knew that there was a call in my life since I was young, and I had been, quote unquote, in church, but it was kind of like riding the coattails of like what my mom had. I still, as a teenager, drank, smoke, obviously was promiscuous, had gotten involved in pornography. And so I still, it didn't exactly change my life. And it wasn't until I was like 18 where I really wanted to take the journey to get to know my faith for myself. So I started reading the Bible. And it was weird. I I didn't want to read like a book like Ecclesiastes or like, Jude, something really complicated. I just wanted to read something I understood. So I would read a proverb a day. And I found a lot of wisdom there, and I would study it and I would actually pray through it. And um, I would actually ask questions about things I didn't understand, but also study for myself. And so I saw a lot of parallels with just regular human life today. I was like, man, this book is alive. And so that's what really helped me understand um, a bit about my own human nature.
Oh, that's great. No, that's great. It's what's fascinating, Jamal. That's such a great point. I mean, it sounds like you're very introspective by itself, like just kind of how you're wired, how God wired you. You seem like a very introspective guy. And then to add into that, reading a proverb a day, right back at when you like you said, I think you said when you were 18. That's fascinating because what's been fascinating for me too is going back through the Bible myself now, looking at it through the lens of EQ is fascinating for me now, right? Because I've never had that. I've never had that. That framework before. That framework of emotions, and that God had emotions, and I just thought, well, I had no idea. I just never even thought about it. So that's super neat that you took kind of your own strengths and wirings and kind of how you had developed yourself at that point and then, and then throwing in God's word into that mix too. And between those two, and like you said, Proverbs, man, there's so much wisdom in Proverbs that applies apply to 300 AD, 1000 AD, and 2021, right? I mean, it's Hebrews 4:12, right? The word of God is living and active, sharp and a double-edged sword, able to penetrate joint marrow, soul and spirit, to judge the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. That's awesome. That's awesome that's kind of how your emotional journey kind of happened there. Okay, so now you're 2021-ish. Take me from that point forward now to today.
From that point, I finished out my career at Department of Justice in 2009. And I was a student liaison, and you pretty much work your way out of the position. I was supposed to go on to be a co-op. I wanted to be a DTS. And it sounds so crazy. My dream was to go into the federal prison system as a drug treatment specialist and get every inmate off of drugs, off of every psychotropic med. Unrealistic, obviously, but that's what I wanted to do. For some reason, there was a glitch with the paperwork and the timing that I applied for the co-op, so I wasn't able to get it. And it was amazing that I had to actually I worked myself. Once I graduated after 6 months, I worked myself out of my position. So I got the highest grade I could get. And I had to close my time out there. And it was amazing that they said, I can't believe you're not staying, and they did this, they threw this going away from me that was huge. Even the director, not the director of our division, the director of the whole United States Federal Bureau of Prisons came to my going away, which was crazy. So that was pretty phenomenal. And so I was without a job. And so I was just seeking jobs, casting my net everywhere. I was in DC. And so for the better part of 3 months, I wasn't working. And I had a lot, at this point, my dad had been a Christian for 3 years, but there was still a bit of a disconnect. I had a lot of bitterness still with him because of the way I grew up and a lot of patterns inside of me that I was blame shifting on him. And I knew I needed some help. And so I went away. There was a residential counseling program in the middle of America in Kentucky, a friend told me about, and I said, you know what? I'm not working right now. And it was like a perfect storm. I just said, I just need to get out of DC for a while. And when I went there, I remember when I met the counselor, I told him all this stuff. I mean, I was going on and on and on and on. And I told him about like my dad and my childhood. And the way he flipped it on me was like, but at this point, you're an adult. You are 24 years of age and you have human responsibility. And it was like, wow. It put the buck on me. Like at this point, I was responsible for my own decisions. If I chose negative things, if I chose any type of addiction, if I chose any type of vegging, if I chose any whatever that was stunting my growth, it's because I chose to. Now I needed to deal with some things. I needed to deal with trauma, but I was also making choices that weren't fruitful for me. And I remember going through that for 7 months and just also learning to release. It's one thing to forgive, but it's another thing to release someone. And when I released my dad, that was when the healing really began. And when I came back in July of 2010, I told him like everything I ever wanted to tell him about, all my highs, my lows, my failures that I'd just been fearful of talking to him about. And the way he just received me, the way he just received his son. I mean, it was like a magic moment. It was so weird too, because I said, hey, can I take a picture of you? I would never do that. It was a random moment. And I remember taking a snapshot of him and it just the smile on his face and just the moment we shared. We were in that park forever. I remember that day like the back of my hand. And so that was like, I'll never forget that day. And that needed to happen to actually put me on my journey. So when I went back, they actually invited me to do an internship there. I had no idea that I would actually become a counselor myself.
Oh, okay, okay, Jahmaal. So yeah. Again, so number one is just your awareness, man. That's amazing. Your awareness through that whole thing. Number one, but then number two, the courage, man, to act on. Okay, hey, look, man, I got some things. I got 3 months. I'm not working right now. Perfect opportunity. I got some junk in my trunk. I need to go figure out what's going on. And for you to have again the awareness and the courage to hey, I need help. I need to work through this stuff. That's massive, bro. That's huge. How long was that that counseling thing that you went through as the student or whatever, as the patient or client, before you went back and became a counselor?
It was 7 months. So
Oh,
from
snap.
Yeah, December to July. I mean, it was intense. It was very intense. And a lot of it I thought would just deal with like the outward things. It actually dealt with a lot of inward things in my mind and my heart. My thinking was wrong. My reasoning was wrong. And a lot of it was my own ego. Now, granted, there were things that were perpetrated on me that yielded this, but it's like, well, what am I to do with this now? And so really
Mm.
doing the intense work like that, the hard work, the stuff that dealt my ego a huge blow, those stones that you just never want to turn over, those are the things that were dealt with. And I, God bless me with like the perfect counselor who would just let me, I never felt fearful of just sharing all of me with him, the highs and the lows, but also receiving those difficult things that he had to share back. And he always was very biblical about it. He never shared his opinion. He said, I want you to actually do the hard thing and take some time. It was this place called a ridge. It was a field. Just go out there. And I was just like, all right, let me just take that and just actually do the hard thing. And a lot of times when you see someone stuck emotionally or psychologically or spiritually or whatever like that, no matter what they believe, it's because they're not willing to do the hard thing. The easy thing to do is get on the internet and just veg out or blame someone or whatever like that or eat something. The hard thing to do is actually let me sit with this. Because when it gets quiet, then it's just you. So
No, I love that. I love that. It's so true. I mean, that's been my own journey. I've been well, so for again, most of my life, I wasn't even aware of this other side of the world. But then once I I yelled, basically what happened, the straw that broke the camel's back on my side was I yelled at my wife 3 times in 3 weeks, and we went to counseling because she's like, bro, number one, don't ever do that again. Number two, you never done that before, which means number three, you got more issues in Time magazine. And I was like, oh snap. Went to this counselor. The counselor turned me on to a revolutionary new concept called feelings and emotions. And I was like, what are you, did you just try and cuss me out? Like, what is this sorcery, Harry Potter, voodoo stuff? And he's like, dude, you have got some emotional junk in your trunk. You got some emotional issues. And for me, dude, it was a mix of anger and terror because I did not understand this language. Number one, I didn't understand the language of emotions. Number two, I was scared to open the door to my emotions. Like what am I gonna find on the other side as I'm going through this? It's almost like going through a haunted house, bro. It's what I felt like. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I was like. Hey, whoa! Like I've lived this far in my life without having any knowledge of this stuff. Do I really want to? Do I really want to do this? And I think there's a lot of people that, because like you said, I mean, it's what I'm a people pleaser addict. I'm a recovering people pleaser addict. I'm a recovering and still working through some food addiction, right? As coping mechanism. I had toxic positivity. I was emotionally codependent, emotionally needy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's real. That's real, Jahmaal, to say that it is so much easier to Netflix and chill than it is to go to the haunted house of Noble of my own life and like, oh, whoa, I don't, let me close that door back up. I'm not, to have the gift and the blessing of taking 7 months to work through that stuff. How did that impact your life?
I mean, it was very transformative. And I couldn't see it at the time, that I was like, man, I don't have a job. I think I live in the DMV. I live right in DC. I'm not in Maryland, not Virginia. I'm in DC. So, and as a man, you want to have a job. That's one of the first things people ask you, what do you do? And so I had to learn for a season to not identify with what I did and get to know who I am, the good, bad, and the ugly. And I didn't see the blessing at the time because it's just like, man, I was actually making pretty good money. This is 2010 and I had a government job. But I also saw like this is a chance to actually deal with some things in you that you have not laid down, that you have not surrendered, that you have not yielded, that you haven't even touched, And so it gave me time not to just scratch the surface, but to actually dig beneath the surface and allow some healing to slow drip like an IV into my bloodstream. So very, very grateful. But as transformative as it was, I didn't like it while it was happening. It was painful,
Right.
very painful. But pain, good, true pain can work for your gain. It actually works for you, not against you. Any bodybuilder will tell you that.
Well, and Hebrews 12:11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. Hebrews 12:11. So, I mean, James 1:2-12. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of faith produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. So, yeah, and that's excellent. Yeah, that's excellent point. That's excellent point. That's great. So, so now you went through the 7 months. They called you back. Hey, we'd like you to be a counselor. Now take us from that point to today.
So from that point to today, of course, all the training, the council training, some is really funny and really exciting, really dynamic. The stuff about medication and all the clinical stuff is like really boring, but it's very necessary. And so I didn't start, because the training takes some years. So I didn't start taking clients until 2013, late part of 2013. And it was weird. My mentor at the time, he said, "You've been doing this for like 3 years already. You're just doing it with the title of certified counselor now. That's all." And I remember when I was supposed to start off with just like one or two people. And on the staff, one of the counselors was actually asked to leave. So I went from 2 to 5 in less than a month. I was like, and one thing I learned in that is I learned how to work with different personality types, different learning abilities, different form levels of neediness, different addictions, all different, and then different ages within a very short span of time. It was just like, of course, you have your one person. It's like, okay, I can start feeling this guy out. I'm sorry for the sound in the background. But when you have 5 different people with 5 very different personalities, oh my goodness, that is a lot. And 5 very different needs. And then you're not just counseling that person, you also get their family, you potentially get their wife, you get their mother, you get the parole officer, you get their know-it-all friend. You get all of that when you deal with a client. And so, and then I started getting clients in different age groups. I started getting people who were divorcees, people who were more than twice my age. And I was really grateful with the folks that I got that, because I look really young for my age. That's like, okay, is this person going to be able to receive from me? Because they probably think they're sitting before a kid. But I was really grateful that God gave me the capacity to know how to serve them right where they were and still maintain who I was. But also to give him to them and let them do the work. It's like, you're not here. If you need me and you're constantly dependent on me, I'm not doing my job. I'm failing you as a counselor. I'm failing you as a mentor. I'm here to equip you. And so fast forward, I was there for 7 years and I just knew it was time to go. So a year ahead of time, I started praying because then the place was amazing and it had some toxic, anytime you're in an environment that's that like tight knit, there was some things I'll be writing about, about that environment that, oh my goodness, it was a learning experience for me because I was in Kentucky. So I was culturally, it did not look like DC looks at all. Now, granted, I wasn't that far from Cincinnati, and my family was in Cincinnati and in Columbus. But I learned a lot. I learned how much of an introvert I really was, and how cool I was just hanging by myself. I learned that very fast. But I learned a lot about my personality being there. And so when it was time to go, and I prayed through again, they surprised me with a really huge going away. I was just like, wow. And in January of that year, 2017, my dad had a major stroke. And so one of my former clients, his dad was a pilot. So he said, anytime you need, you ask me, I'll get you a standby flight. And so I found myself while working there, I was just flying back here to see him time and time again. And it was seeing him like that. I mean, this man used to be a roofing constructor, so he was so strong. Seeing how it paralyzed the right side of his body, it was hard seeing my dad like that. And when I would come back through the years from 2010 up until that point, we would do everything together. So a person who I deemed my worst enemy became my best friend. And so seeing your best friend as somebody that you love the most, the man you love the most, in that state was very difficult. And having to manage a caseload, it was emotionally, it knocked the wind out of me. And so I knew that it was time to go. And when I got back on September, I think I got back September 20th, 3 days later, he had started getting better because he was doing physical and occupational and speech therapy. And it was a care plan to bring him home. It looked pretty daunting, but I was like, okay, there's hope now. He started talking again, started eating again, started walking again. He got critically ill as soon as I got back. And we lived in a hospital for 2.5 months. I mean, I watched him have seizures. I watched there be blood everywhere. I watched him scream and writhe in pain, go from being nonverbal, just so many different operations after operations. And so it really, I felt like I was leaving because I had a plan to actually work in Pennsylvania. I had to cut that off, and I prayed about it, and I prayed to stay here. And in December 17th, 2007, no, December 5th, 2017, he passed away. I was there when he passed. And I remember just reading Psalms and singing over him as he had transitioned. And he looked different. It's almost like all that pain that was on his body, he just looked so much different as he had transitioned. It was like God just saying to me, he's home now. And I said, man, I'll until we meet again. And I kissed him on his forehead. And so for the whole month of December, I don't even remember when I turned 33. I had no recollection of that because my birthday was like very soon right after his dying. And Christmas, I don't remember anything from 2017 that month. His funeral was amazing. But it was January when I really went through it. And that's when I went through wanting to be an atheist. And I understood for the first time in my life, like, how could somebody not believe in God? I remember hating God, being angry. I remember dropping every F-bomb and things I can't repeat on this podcast. I would walk outside because I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know what to say. I gained 30 pounds. I would sit in my room all day. I'd move back. I never thought I wanted to stay in DC. I moved back here and I was very depressed. And I would just go out to this empty tennis court and I would just scream all sorts of expletives. All I could do was drop F-bombs and tell God how much I hated him. And that was the state of my life for like 4 straight months. I never went to an atheist website. I didn't toy around with the literature because writing is powerful. But I said, I couldn't watch the news. I said, well, there was a God. Why do these things happen? And so I could use the littlest, slightest information to make an indictment against God's character or even the existence of God completely. I started going to this thing called Grief Share. And
wait. Jahmaal, real quick before the Grief Share, was all this emotion, this intense emotion of 4 months, 4 months of really, being angry at God and just feeling a lot of anger and rage and everything. Was that from your father passing?
Yeah.
Okay. So you that was you just working through that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the Grief Share. Tell us more about the Grief Share.
So I started going to this thing called Grief Share with my mom and my sister. And the cool thing is that because I wasn't working, we all went together. My sister was working and I had a pretty busy schedule going to networking events, looking for a job and going to men's midweek study. But that was a day that was open for me. And it helped me to learn how to process it by not stuffing the emotion, saying I am angry about this. And I didn't know anything about heaven. People talk about hell so much. Even people who don't believe anything always talk about hell. But it's like, no one talks about heaven. And so I had no idea. And I still can't fathom the reality that he lives in. But I was like, okay, if that's where he is, I am happy for him and jealous of him. And I probably couldn't pay him to come back here. And that didn't so much make it better, but it gave me hope that if he was meant to finish his race, he would still be here and that he was finished with his race And also it helped me process that because we had became so close for years of not being very close. So for 11 years of my life, I kept asking God, why'd you take my father? It's like, for some people it never happens, but I gave him to you 11 years as a brother in Christ, you know? And I began to see my dad as my equalizer, but the whole time God was like, I'm your equalizer. That was a tough pill to swallow. I'm not going to sit here with a smile or fake positivity and say, I really wanted to hear that. I did not want to hear that, but that was the truth. That was the truth for me. And it gave me something that I thought would really tear me away from God. And that moment in 2018, it gave me deeper roots. And my relationship with God was closer than it ever been. This was on the heels of the death of my dad, which was kind of crazy. So, and mind you, this whole time I had been putting in applications, and that would mean some lucrative jobs, but they would be like located in Arlington or Alexandria, Virginia, or different parts of Maryland. And then when I would do the interview, they say, hey, do you want to relocate? And I'm like, but you have the job listed here. They say, oh no, the job's actually in Maine or in Wyoming or in South Dakota. I'm like, that's not what you have it listed as. And so I knew in the early stages of grief, I did want to honor my mom as a widow. And I turned down some really lucrative jobs, even one as a scrum master in Richmond, where I could have got paid some really good money. And so for the better part of a year, up until the date when I left, I didn't work. And so I had to identify as just who, again, I had to circle back to who I am, because I wanted to tell people I come back to DC, what I do. And it's just like, at the time, I wasn't doing anything, quote unquote. So I started going to a career network ministry in McLean, Virginia. And that's when I networked with a young lady by the name of Jennifer Simpson. And she worked at a place called International Justice Mission. I knew nothing about human trafficking, at least not global. I knew about stateside human trafficking because I would go to the psych ward with my mother when I would visit. Mm. And I wasn't thinking that wasn't really my heart or my, passion was human trafficking, and that wasn't it. But it was a Christian NGO, and she said, why don't you come to a prayer? She had gotten a job. And so in April, I went to a prayer with her, and I was like, yo, these people pray before they work. It was some serious, these people are like dynamic professionals. Lawyers, caseworkers, got the best in the business at this place. And I was like, they pray. That's crazy. And that's what drew me to it. And the founder, Gary Haugen, they did a TED Talk. And his TED Talk just floored me because I didn't know that much trafficking was still happening across the world. And so I applied for positions, got turned down. And then my mother handed me an announcement for a contractor for something called Liberate. We did an interview for 11 minutes. And the girl said, hey, I want you to start. I want you to start right away. And so I came on as a contractor. And then I switched divisions 3 months later and started working as a global lead for people services division. So that was my full-time gig, man. And it's weird that it's not, at the time, it's not what I wanted, but it's what God had for me, And my journey up until this point, it wasn't until the pandemic hit, because I didn't know anything about like LinkedIn. I thought LinkedIn was a place that you just drop your resume and just ghost it, and you wait for somebody to hire you or you network with somebody. I had got to this place and I found out that you can actually develop, you go on LinkedIn and you put like what you've done, but also I started, for whatever reason, I wasn't on any social media either. Wasn't on Facebook, wasn't on Instagram, wasn't nowhere. I started having these videos that I would just post because I would do video blog while I was away. And I never thought that, I always thought Instagram, the way Instagram started with the pictures, I was like, this is just stupid. All these selfies. Tell me the why behind the what. Why are you at the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Why are you at Wimbledon? Why are you at the US Open? Why'd you go to that NFL game? What's up with that touchdown? So I always would video blog because I'm like, I'm giving the why behind the what. And so I would start posting these things on LinkedIn of all places. And I didn't know about how long or how short. I just knew, don't put a long video on LinkedIn. And somehow people just start seeing my stuff. And I would start commenting on other people's stuff. And there was a guy by the name of Billy Samoa Salibi. And he had a post about being a recovering perfectionist. And I was like, oh, he gets me. So I posted a comment, and somehow we ended up having a Zoom meeting, and that was the beginning and the end. He said, "Dude, you could be the next Mike Jordan of this platform if you want to be." So that's how my journey started. And I did one post, and he opened up his network, and he tagged a bunch of folks. He was like, "Yo, check this guy out." And that the rest is history that's still being written, man. So
wow, that's amazing. What a blessing. So, okay, so because that's how so you came up on my feed somehow too. I don't know, I'm new onto LinkedIn. I'm kind of new in the space, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on. But anyway, one of your posts or something came across my feed. I'm like, wow, this guy seems legit. It seems like we have a lot of things in common, and yeah, that's one of the things I noticed. Like, man, this dude is a serious influencer. Like, you're impacting a lot of people through your content and stuff. So you're a LinkedIn influencer, and are you still the global lead for is it Liberate or the human trafficking
International Justice Mission? Yeah.
Okay.
I don't. It's weird. I actually don't really like the word influencer. I just consider myself an impactor, not an influencer. Influencer to me has a bit of a bad rap because some of the real influencers are some of the most unsung heroes that you never really see. And they do so much integral work with integrity behind the scenes. They're not out here trying to make a name. They make a name by the life that they live. That's an influencer. If that's an influencer, that's the person I want to be. But I would say an impactor, someone who wants to leave a ripple effect in this planet for good and affect change in as many people as possible as I'm changing myself. That's my dream.
Man, I love that. And you may have just said it, but just in case you didn't, let me just ask it another question or another way. What is your purpose in life?
My purpose in life is to be the me God made me to be, and to encourage and walk with someone so they can become the them that God made them to come to receive the blessings that he designed them to receive. That's my purpose.
Love it. Love it. What advice would you give to somebody that either has not begun or is just beginning their emotional growth journey, emotional healing journey?
Be willing to do the hard thing and sit with what is difficult about you and face yourself down for what you really are. And not that that's what you are, that you identify, I am this way, but I have done these things. There's a good part of guilt that says this is what I've done. Shame says this is who I am. You don't want to claim that as your identity, but identify with the good guilt of this is what I've done. This has been the pattern. And now I want to take the necessary painful steps to redevelop another pattern. And where I've been ignorant, because if we're emotionally unintelligent, obviously it's ignorant, be willing to take the time to grow in wisdom. It doesn't happen overnight. It's very much a journey. It's not a sprint.
100%. Love that. What have been some really impactful resources for you along your mental, emotional, spiritual growth journey?
Well, first and foremost, the number one bestseller, the Bible. That's been a huge resource. Two, I would say, and I'm forgetting the author. It's amazing how it's skipping my mind, but it's a book called When People Are Big and God Is Small. For anyone who's a recovering perfectionist or people pleaser, has horrible boundaries, that's a great resource. Another one, and one of the books that I actually counsel and coach through would be 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and also a book called Boundaries.
It's called what?
Boundaries.
Oh man, Dr. Henry Cloud. Heck Henry Cloud, man.
Baby. That book is that book will dig into your stuff. So
awesome. Awesome. Love it. Awesome. Okay. And finally, Jahmaal, how do we find you? How do we follow you? How do we connect with you with what you're doing in the world?
One of the easiest ways to connect with me, and one of the places I'm most active is on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Instagram. It's spelled wrong, but it's JLoves, LUVS, to listen. That's Instagram. You can also find me on TikTok at JLoves to listen. And you can also find me, I'm the only JAHMAAL, only Jahmaal that spells it that way, Marshall on Facebook. And also www.listenthenSpeak.com. That's my website. So those are the places to find me.
Jahmaal, can't thank you enough, bro, for all the insights, your transparency, your vulnerability, sharing your emotional growth journey, and then how you're impacting the world today, man, leaving it a better place. Totally appreciate you. Totally appreciate your time and your wisdom that you share with us, brother.